You think she'll cry when she sees it? I froze halfway down the basement stairs, still holding the basket of folded laundry. The old light bulb above me flickered once, then steadied. Upstairs, I heard the clink of a beer bottle on the granite counter, followed by the voice I knew too well, Daniel's best friend, Sean. She always acts so composed, like she's above all of it. But wait till you hand her that envelope. She'll lose it. $5 says she runs out crying. Daniel laughed, that low, lazy, arrogant laugh he always used when he wanted people to think he was harmless. "You're on," he said. "She's too proud, but women like her always crack." I didn't breathe. Couldn't. My fingers clenched around a rolled-up pair of socks as their voices faded into the hum of the football game playing in the background. And right then, in a dusty stairwell lined with family photos and faded paint, I knew something I hadn't allowed myself to believe for years. This man didn't just stop loving me. He never respected me to begin with. If you're here right now and you believe no one should ever be made a joke in their own home, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps us find others who need strength more than silence. And while you're at it, drop a comment. Tell me what city or small town you're watching from. I'd love to know. Now, let's go back, because the truth is, that stairwell wasn't the first moment everything cracked. It started months earlier, maybe years, in ways I didn't even notice at the time. My name is Emily Carter, and I used to be someone who laughed too easily and apologized too much. I taught second grade at Sycamore Ridge Elementary, just outside Bloomington, Indiana, a quiet town with warm springs, judgmental neighbors, and Christmas parades that started in October. Everyone thought Daniel and I were the perfect small-town couple. He ran a growing home construction business, always wore a button-down on Sundays, knew every bartender by name. I guess I liked that in the beginning. It made me feel safe, seen. But over time, his compliments turned into jabs, like little pebbles tossed at a window. "Trying a little hard with that lipstick, aren't we?" he once asked before a fundraiser dinner. Or, "You can be so sensitive, Em. It's exhausting." When I tried to talk about how alone I felt, even in our own house, it wasn't dramatic, not the way you'd expect. There were no slamming doors, no bruises, just slow erosion. I stopped going to yoga, skipped Sunday calls with my mom. I let friendships drift like dandelions on the sidewalk. Beautiful, fleeting, forgotten. Because every time I hinted at needing more affection, more honesty, more support, he'd respond with a smirk and a story about how other men had it so much worse. "At least I don't cheat," he once said, handing me his half-finished plate like I was a waitress. I nodded, smiled, took the plate. What else was I supposed to do? Tell him I felt invisible, even when his arm was around me in public? That I couldn't remember the last time I cried? Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I didn't think anyone would care if I did? Everyone saw us as fine. His parents adored him. My principal said we were a model couple, and our neighbors waved like we were the damn Cleavers. But inside, I was folding myself smaller every day, like a letter no one was going to read. And still, I wasn't ready to give up. Not until that moment on the stairs. Not until they bet on my tears like I was a punchline. That's when everything changed. He didn't know I heard them. Not that night, not the next morning, not even a week later when we sat shoulder to shoulder in his truck, driving to his parents' lake house for Thanksgiving. the radio humming quietly while he scrolled through emails at red lights like I didn't exist 2 feet away. I watched the blur of trees pass the window, yellow leaves trembling in the cold, and thought about how easy it must be for him to plot my humiliation and still ask me if I remembered to pack his father's bourbon. I said I did. I had. And I hated myself for it. That drive felt like a funeral I hadn't been invited to. My own. His family welcomed us the way they always did. Tight hugs from his mother that smelled like cinnamon lotion. His brother cracking open beers before noon. Cousins chasing each other through the hallway. The kind of wholesome chaos people dream of. But for me, everything felt 2 seconds too slow. Every sound muffled, every smile forced. And then came the dinner. The long mahogany table, the stupid gold-rimmed plates they only brought out for holidays, the glint of silverware under the dimmed chandelier. I knew it was coming. I just didn't know how it would feel when it did. Daniel stood to make a toast. I remember that clearly. His voice calm, smooth, charming enough that even the cousins who had tuned out for the last half hour perked up. To family, he said, lifting his glass, and to brave decisions. Then, with a practiced pause, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. No ribbon, no bow, just a sterile rectangle placed right next to my plate. And to clarity, he added with a smirk. At first, no one said anything. Maybe they didn't understand. I did. I stared at the envelope like it was ticking. Then I opened it. The first line read, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Carter v. Carter. Already signed. Already dated. Filed. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just blinked and looked up at him. And he smiled. He actually smiled, like he'd won something. Maybe he thought I'd collapse. Maybe he expected yelling, or a wine glass thrown, or an emotional meltdown that proved every cruel thing he'd ever said about me. I gave him none of it. I tucked the papers back into the envelope, placed it neatly in my lap, and took a sip of water. The room stayed frozen, like a collective breath was being held. Then his dad cleared his throat awkwardly and muttered something about the turkey getting cold. I made it through dinner. I don't remember the taste of the food. I just remember the hum in my ears, like static. Later that night, while Daniel and his family watched reruns of football games and argued about politics like nothing had happened, I locked myself in the guest room and cried into a decorative pillow shaped like a cornucopia. That was the part no one saw, the part after the performance. I buried my face in that stupid velvet pillow and let go of 5 years of being the woman who always smiled, always excused, always made things easier. My throat ached from holding back every scream I never got to scream. My whole body pulsed with disbelief. He had planned this, announced it like a promotion, used my heartbreak as entertainment. But somewhere between sobs, a quiet, impossible thought crept into my mind. What if I let him believe he won? What if I smiled and planned my own ending? The next morning, I served coffee with steady hands. No one brought it up. Not his mom, not his brother, not even Daniel. He acted like it was handled, over, filed, and done. But I hadn't signed yet, and that silence, that was my first move. He thought my quiet meant surrender. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to learn, was that my silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. I had spent so many years shrinking for him, adapting to his moods, smoothing over his sharpness like worn stone in a river. But that day, in the kitchen, wiping counters while he talked about football stats to his brother, I felt something settle in my chest that hadn't been there in years. Resolve. You see, humiliation is strange. When it burns hot, it makes you lash out, self-destruct. But when it burns low, quiet, and steady, it becomes fuel. And that's what I felt flickering in me as I packed our things and smiled politely through goodbyes. Not rage, not sadness, just fuel. And a plan that hadn't formed yet, but would. I didn't go back home with Daniel. That Sunday after Thanksgiving, I told him I needed a few days to clear my head and drove to my friend Monica's place just outside Bloomington. I'd been there once before, years ago, for her son's birthday party. And I remember how warm the house felt then, full of mismatched mugs and dog toys and laughter that didn't sound forced. Monica opened the door, still wearing pajama pants, saw my face, and didn't ask a single question. She just stepped aside, held out her arms, and said, "Get in here." And that was the first time in days I exhaled without flinching. We spent that night on her couch, a cheesy holiday movie playing in the background, while I picked at a bowl of popcorn I wasn't really eating. I told her everything. How Daniel had dropped divorce papers like a Thanksgiving toast, how he bet with his best friend that I'd fall apart. I expected Monica to be outraged. She wasn't. She just nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing in that scary focused way she gets when she's working through something in her head. "Do you remember that dumb home equity form he joked about years ago?" she asked suddenly. My heart thudded. I did. It was over wine one night. Daniel had made some sarcastic remark about protecting his empire from my Etsy obsession, and scribbled a mock agreement on a notepad. I'd laughed at the time, but he signed it. I had folded it and stuck it in a drawer. It was still there, or at least I hoped it was. The next day, I drove back to our house when I knew he'd be out at work. The silence inside felt different. Cold, yes, but not intimidating anymore. I dug through the filing cabinet in the office, past old tax returns and expired warranties, and found it. A folded sheet of lined paper, Daniel's unmistakable sharp, slanted handwriting scrawled across the top. A property agreement listing what he considered off-limits in case we ever split. It had started as a joke, but he'd signed and dated it. No pressure, no edits, no witnesses, but his words were clear. Monica had contacts. She worked with a legal clinic through her job at the community center and offered to run it by someone she trusted. "It's not airtight," she said after a few days, "but it's something, and it gives us a place to start." That was when I started my journal. Nothing fancy. Just a cheap spiral notebook I bought at the gas station with a pack of gum and a soda. I tucked it under the bed, behind my old high school yearbooks, and wrote in it every night. Not just about Daniel's words or actions, but about how I felt when they happened. The way my stomach tightened when he called me delusional for asking why we hadn't gone on a real date in over a year. The flicker of panic when I saw Nina pop up on his phone during a Netflix movie. The numbness that set in after I asked him who she was, and he shrugged and said, "You're being insecure again." And maybe I had been. Insecure, quiet, easy to dismiss. But not anymore. I began small, subtle things. I stopped reacting when he provoked me. No more defending myself when he made digs about my clothes or sighed loudly when I asked if he'd be home for dinner. I smiled instead, nodded. Let him think I was retreating. What he didn't realize was I wasn't folding. I was repositioning, observing, waiting. For the first time, I was seeing Daniel clearly, not through the lens of who I wanted him to be, but for who he really was. A man who mistook cruelty for charisma, who performed empathy when it served him, and dismissed pain when it didn't. There were days when I almost gave up, when the weight of pretending felt too heavy. But Monica kept showing up. She called every afternoon just to check in, dropped off groceries I never asked for. Once, she slid a flash drive across my kitchen counter and said, "When you're ready, we back everything up here. Journal entries, photos, screenshots, his voice on voicemail. All of it." I stared at the small silver rectangle like it was a weapon. And maybe it was. Not to destroy him, but to protect me. To build a record of truth no one could erase or spin. I even found the courage to call Jenny, my old college roommate, now a paralegal in Indianapolis. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since my wedding. When I told her everything, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What do you want to come out of this?" The question stunned me. No one had asked me that, not even me. I swallowed hard and whispered, "I want to feel safe again, and I want him to regret ever thinking I wouldn't survive without him." She exhaled sharply. "Okay, then let's build that, carefully." And so we did. The thing about silence is, if you keep it long enough, it starts making noise. Daniel noticed before I expected him to. It was the little things, really. I stopped asking where he was going. I stopped chasing him with reminders about appointments or dinners with his parents. I started answering questions with a pleasant, almost robotic tone. "Sure, whatever you think is best." At first, he seemed relieved, like I'd finally come around. But control addicts don't like obedience. They like conflict they can win. And the absence of friction started making him uneasy. He started picking fights over nothing. "You used to put pepper in the eggs. Why'd you stop?" he said one morning, his voice sharp despite the steaming mug of coffee in his hand. I shrugged. Didn't think it mattered. He stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. Then, with a tight smile, he said, "You're acting weird." I kissed his cheek and said, "You're probably just tired." That week, he changed all the passwords to our joint accounts, bank, utilities, even the grocery delivery app. I found out when I went to log in and the code didn't work. When I asked him about it, his tone was casual. "Just tightening things up. You've been so distracted lately. I figured I'd handle the bills." The way he said it was so normal, so reasonable. Like it wasn't a power play, like I didn't see right through him. I told Monica and she smirked. "He's squirming. That's good. Let him." But later that night, alone in bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many more moves he had left before things got dangerous. The next morning, I printed all the transaction histories I still had access to, just in case. Then came the night he came home drunk, more than usual, and stood in the kitchen, swaying slightly, a beer still in his hand. "You think I don't notice," he slurred. "The way you've been acting, like you're better than me." I froze at the sink, a dish in my hand. I didn't turn around. "I don't think that," I said, quietly. I'm just tired. He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Of me? I didn't answer. Silence again. A silence that made him bang the bottle down on the counter hard enough to crack the glass. But he didn't say anything else, just grabbed his keys and left. I watched his taillights disappear down the road, and only then realized I was shaking. That night, I pulled the journal from its hiding spot and wrote just one sentence. He's starting to unravel. I need to move faster. The unraveling came in waves, passive, aggressive texts in the middle of my workday, sudden compliments that didn't feel real. One morning, he brought me flowers from the grocery store. Daisies. My least favorite. Saw these and thought of you, he said, all charm and practiced sincerity. I took them with a smile. Thanks, Daniel. That's sweet. Then I placed them in a vase and watched them wilt within days. The emotional whiplash got worse. One day, he asked if I wanted to take a weekend trip, like old times. The next, he accused me of plotting something when I came home late from visiting Monica. You've got this look, he said, like you know something I don't. I laughed and kissed his cheek. It's called stress, babe. Try living with you. He didn't laugh back. That night, I synced his old phone to my cloud again, quietly, carefully, and found several calls to an unsaved number. One name popped up once in a voicemail transcription. Camilla. I didn't recognize it. I didn't ask. I just saved it. I started labeling voice memos with dates, scanning receipts from his gym bag, and highlighting purchases that didn't make sense. 2 dinners for one, spa charges out of state, Uber rides at midnight from addresses I didn't recognize. I wasn't angry anymore. I was collecting, one dot at a time. Still, there were moments I questioned myself. One afternoon, I passed by the mirror in the hallway and barely recognized the woman staring back. Quiet, polished, but cold. I missed laughing. I missed the old me, the one who used to read in the sunroom and sing to the radio while folding laundry. But then I'd think about the envelope, the bet, the way he called me predictable, and the guilt would dissolve into focus. It was a Thursday when Jenny called with news. "Em," she said, "I showed the property agreement to our firm's senior attorney. It's not just usable, it's damning, especially if he never rescinded it or clarified it legally." I sat on the porch steps, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the sound of hope drop like pebbles into the lake of fear I'd been carrying. "And the journals?" I asked. "You keep writing," she said. "Every incident, every word. If he tries to flip this, we'll bury him in his own timeline." But I wasn't thinking about burying him. Not yet. I was thinking about survival, about peace, and whether or not I could really keep pretending for much longer. Then, at his company's winter charity auction, Daniel made a mistake. In a room full of colleagues and sponsors, he leaned over during dinner and whispered just loud enough, "Glad you wore something flattering tonight. Makes people forget how boring you are." The table laughed politely. I did too. But inside, something shifted. I looked at him, at his grin, his wine-stained teeth, his hands that only ever touched me when someone else was watching, and thought, I am going to end this, and I'm going to do it on my terms. It was Christmas Eve, and the Carter house was decorated like something out of a magazine. Daniel insisted on it, every year. The tree was 12 feet tall, ornaments spaced just right, a garland draped over the fireplace like it had been blessed by Martha Stewart herself. He had hired a catering team this time, claiming he didn't want me stressed, though I knew it was more about presentation than kindness. Appearances always mattered more than people to Daniel. His parents flew in from Arizona. His brother, Greg, brought his new girlfriend, a 24-year-old influencer who spent most of dinner filming her wine glass. There was turkey, ham, sweet potato casserole, and laughter. But underneath it all, the air buzzed with anticipation. Only no one but me understood what it was building toward. Daniel had been overly pleasant all week, bought me a necklace, cheap but shiny, rubbed my shoulders while I made coffee, made a show of holding my hand when we answered the door. He was grooming the image, getting ready for the curtain to rise. I could see it in the way he watched me. Not with warmth, but with calculation. Like he was already savoring the reaction he believed he would pull from me in front of a full audience. The dinner table stretched across the formal dining room, polished and gleaming, each place setting perfectly aligned. I wore a dark green velvet dress, modest, elegant, and just dramatic enough. My sister-in-law complimented it. "You look lovely," she said. "Thanks," I smiled. "It's a special night." After dessert plates had been cleared and a few guests wandered off for seconds of wine or coffee, Daniel stood up slowly, glass in hand, tapping it lightly with the back of a spoon. A hush fell over the table. Everyone turned toward him, expecting a sentimental toast or perhaps a cheesy joke. Instead, he reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out an envelope. White, thick, too formal to be anything kind. "I have something for Emily," he said, his voice buttery and calm. "A holiday surprise." I blinked slowly, every part of me already knowing what was inside. Around the table, eyes danced, some curious, some uneasy. Daniel handed me the envelope with the same smugness I imagined Caesar wore, before declaring himself emperor. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," he added, like he was doing me a favor. I opened it slowly, deliberately. Inside, another petition for divorce. This time with highlighted sections. Financial terms skewed entirely in his favor. Preemptive claims of abandoned marital duties. Carefully crafted manipulation, polished and printed. I folded the papers and looked up. "Thank you," I said softly, voice unwavering. "Let me return the favor." I reached beneath the table and retrieved a small silver box, no bigger than a book. Lifted the lid, pulled out a leather folder, and laid it gently beside his untouched wine glass. "You might want to read that aloud," I said. A few chuckles echoed nervously around the room. He frowned, opened the folder, scanned the first page, and froze. His mouth parted slightly, lips moving without sound. His hand trembled just enough for the paper to twitch. Across the table, Greg leaned forward. "What is it?" he asked. Daniel didn't answer, so I did. "It's a legally binding asset agreement," I said clearly so everyone could hear. "Signed by Daniel last year, voluntarily, and notarized." I paused just long enough for the weight to settle. "It protects my share of the home, our joint savings, and includes language confirming that any attempt to misrepresent our marriage history can be challenged with documented proof, of which I have plenty." Someone gasped. His mother dropped her fork. "You tricked me," Daniel said under his breath. Eyes locked on mine. "No," I replied, tilting my head slightly. "You just never thought I'd read the fine print. You signed it drunk, Remember? Joking about your empire. You handed me the pen." His jaw flexed. "This won't hold up." I smiled gently. "That's what your attorney said 2 days ago, before he emailed Jenny back, after reviewing the timestamps, witness log, and metadata. But you're welcome to try." The silence in the room was heavy, the kind of silence that wraps around everyone like a cold wind. Greg's girlfriend stared wide-eyed, clutching her phone mid-record. Daniel's mother reached for her wine, visibly pale. And then I pulled one more envelope from my clutch, this one slimmer, softer. I slid it across the table, let it stop near his hand. "One more gift," I said. He hesitated before opening it. Inside, a single sonogram photo, 8 weeks, clear and unmistakable. Daniel stared at it like it was in another language. Slowly, he looked up at me. "Is this—" "Yes," I said. "I'm pregnant." A sharp inhale swept through the room, like a gasp had passed from one person to the next. His eyes flickered with something. Was it joy? Relief? Fear? For a second, I saw the old Daniel, the charming one. But then it passed, because the math hit him: prenup, pregnancy, custody, child support. "I was going to tell you," I said softly, "but you handed me divorce papers before dessert." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands dropped to his lap. The pages from the prenup folder fanned out across the table like damning petals. He began, but the words never arrived. I stood, smoothing my dress. "I'll have the locks changed tomorrow," I said, calm as ever. "Please arrange a time to collect your things." Greg muttered, "Holy," and leaned back, shaking his head. "I'll drive him home," his father said quietly, rising with slow shame in his posture. Daniel still hadn't moved. I turned to the others, offering a small smile. "Apple pie or pumpkin?" Beth, Daniel's cousin, blinked and then laughed, sudden and genuine. "Pumpkin," she said, "for sure." And just like that, the room shifted. The balance of power had changed, not with screaming, not with violence, but with truth, ink, and timing. And I felt more peace in that moment than I had in years. Daniel didn't say a word as he left. Not when his father took his coat from the back of the chair. Not when Greg offered to carry his folder of humiliation. Half open, pages fluttering like the broken feathers of a fallen bird. Not even when I closed the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. It was the quietest Christmas Eve I'd ever experienced, and the most peaceful. No dramatic goodbyes, no slammed doors, just the slow crumbling of a man who thought he'd win by betting on someone else's pain. The next morning, his key didn't work. I'd called the locksmith at 7 a.m. sharp and had the locks changed before my coffee cooled. The man who came was gentle-eyed and didn't ask questions. I handed him the old key and said, "Make sure it never fits again." He just nodded and got to work. When he left, he handed me a new set of keys and said, "Merry Christmas, ma'am." I held them in my palm a long time after he was gone, the weight of them heavier than I expected. For the first time in years, I had something that was mine. Secure, solid, quiet. Daniel didn't call. Not that day, not the next. But Jenny did. "You should see this," she said over the phone, half laughing, half serious. His attorney just filed an amended motion, trying to invalidate the agreement. But it's sloppy, panicked, and frankly, it's too late. Your documentation is airtight. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. It was more like validation, like a voice in my head whispering, "You weren't crazy. You weren't dramatic. You were right to prepare." And that feeling, that quiet affirmation, it was more powerful than any courtroom victory. But Daniel's losses weren't just legal. A few days later, Greg's girlfriend, who had silently filmed part of the Christmas Eve meltdown for her vlog, posted a vague but damning video about toxic men who gaslight, manipulate, and underestimate the wrong woman. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. Word got around fast. Daniel's firm dropped him from 2 major projects. A board seat he was supposed to fill was quietly reassigned. Colleagues who once slapped him on the back now avoided eye contact in the hallway. His swagger dimmed. His confidence, so tied to appearances, began to rot in real time. Monica called one morning, cackling as she scrolled her phone. "Girl, someone tagged me in a Reddit thread. There's a whole post analyzing your Christmas Eve move. Like, they're breaking it down like Game of Thrones. Queen energy. Chess level revenge. You're basically folklore now." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Not out of pride, but because I felt light. Still, not everyone celebrated. Some people, mutual friends, distant cousins, sent neutral texts, the kind that start with "I'm not taking sides," and end with useless emotional detachment. A few unfollowed me on social media. Others ghosted entirely. And that was okay. People show you who they are when things get real. Let them. Beth, Daniel's cousin, showed up the day after New Year's with a bag of groceries and a bottle of ginger tea. "I know what he was," she said, placing a hand gently on my arm. "And I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I saw it. I just didn't want to rock the boat." Her voice cracked a little. "But you did. And it saved more than just you." We cried a little, hugged a lot, then made soup and watched trashy reality TV like we were 20 again. Meanwhile, Daniel continued unraveling. He filed one more motion, this time, claiming emotional distress, attempting to paint me as manipulative and unhinged. Jenny called me within minutes. "He's reaching. He's trying to flip the narrative. But don't worry. We've got recordings, emails, timelines. If this were poker, he's bluffing with an empty hand." He tried to show up once, a week after New Year's, parked outside the house in his truck, headlights off, just sat there for an hour. Monica, who'd been staying with me for the weekend, spotted him through the window. "You want me to go out there?" she asked, cracking her knuckles. I shook my head. "No need. Let him see what peace looks like." Eventually, he drove off. I never saw him come back. And through all of it, court dates, digital whispers, legal threads, I kept moving. I painted the guest room a soft sage green, replaced the sheets on the master bed with ones I picked out alone, white with little golden stars. I started playing music in the morning again. Nina Simone, Billie Holiday, voices that reminded me of strength I didn't even know I had inside me. I hung up a photo in the hallway, just me, holding the first sonogram print, smiling without force for the first time in years. Beneath it, I wrote 3 words in black marker. "We are rising." And we were. The first time I felt her kick, I was folding a blanket in the living room. One of those oversized ones with the faux fur lining and winter patterns I used to hide in during long, heavy nights. There was music playing, something light and warm, maybe Nora Jones, and sunlight was slanting across the floor in a way that made everything feel soft and new. It was barely a flutter, like a secret knocking from the inside out. I froze, one hand pressing instinctively to my belly, and smiled so wide it hurt. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was some movie moment, but because it felt like hope, small, certain, and quietly alive. From then on, everything shifted again, but slower this time, quieter, in a way that felt sacred. I started building a nursery. Nothing extravagant. Thrifted furniture, hand-painted stencils, yellow curtains that made the room glow in the late afternoon light. I found an old rocking chair at a secondhand shop downtown. The woman behind the counter gave me a discount when I told her it was for a single mom starting fresh. "Been there," she said with a wink, wrapping the cushion like it was made of gold. Monica and Jenny took turns visiting. Sometimes we cooked, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we sat in silence, listening to the rain, sipping tea with honey and clove. No pressure to talk, no performance, just comfort. One evening, Monica surprised me with a gift, a small leather-bound notebook embossed with my initials. "For everything ahead," she said. I kept it on my nightstand and wrote in it every night. Not about the past anymore, just moments, dreams, little things. The smell of cinnamon bread in the morning, the way the wind rustled the trees outside the baby's window, the sound of my own breath when I finally allowed myself to sleep without fear. I gave birth in early summer. The hospital room was warm, the sheets crisp, the nurse kind. There was no one pacing in the hallway, no one checking his phone between contractions. Just me, focused, ready. When she was placed in my arms, I didn't cry. I just stared. Her cheeks were round and pink, her tiny fingers wrapped around one of mine like she already knew who I was. "We're okay," I whispered. "We're going to be okay." I named her Grace. The first few weeks were hard, of course. Sleepless nights, endless bottles, tiny socks that disappeared like magic. But I was never alone. Beth came with casseroles and jokes. Monica organized a baby book club. Jenny sent framed photos from that sonogram day with a sticky note that read, "The day you changed everything." My house was smaller now, my life simpler. But it was mine, completely mine. Daniel never showed up. Not for the birth, not for the first birthday. The court had ordered shared custody if he filed, but he never did. Maybe he knew. Maybe he finally saw that no piece of paper could rewrite what he'd handed me. A reason to leave and the freedom to never look back. I didn't chase him. I didn't speak his name inside my house. Grace would know enough someday, but not now. Not like that. Instead, I taught her joy. I let her paint on the walls of the hallway when she was 2. Just chalk outlines of flowers and suns and stick figures with big round smiles. We planted herbs in the backyard. Basil, rosemary, lavender. I told her stories before bed about brave women and quiet victories, about how strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the act of staying soft after being broken. On what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary, I spent the day barefoot, walking around the house with music playing. Grace was napping. I made peach cobbler and sang along to an old Stevie Wonder track. When the sun dipped low, I lit 3 candles in the living room. One for who I was, one for who I left behind, and one for the woman I was still becoming. You know, I used to think peace would come like thunder. Loud, final, shattering everything before it. But that's not how it arrived for me. Peace came slowly, like light through curtains, like the sound of your child laughing down the hallway, like breathing all the way in for the first time in years and realizing you're not scared of what's next. If you're still here, listening to this story, thank you. Really. Because maybe you've been where I was. Maybe you're still there. Maybe someone made you feel small, predictable, powerless. But let me tell you something that took me far too long to learn. The moment you stop waiting to be rescued, you become the hero. And that kind of quiet strength, it's unstoppable. So, wherever you're listening from, drop a comment. Tell me your city, your favorite moment, or just say, I'm still here. Because surviving isn't the end of the story. Choosing to live well after it. That's the real plot twist. And trust me, I'm just getting started.